managerial accounting break-even point calculations. Now, remember in our last video we looked at the contribution margin income statement, and we had a situation where if the price per unit was $20, variable costs were $5 per unit, yielding a contribution margin of 15, and fixed costs were 50. If we only sold 25 units, instead of having a profit, we had a loss. And the question management wants to know is, or the answer to is, well, how many units do we have to sell before we no longer have a loss? And that place, that point, is called the break-even point. The break-even point. And in order to calculate break-even point, we need to convert that contribution margin income statement into a formula. So you recall that to calculate sales, we took the price per unit times the number of units sold. So in our formula, we'll use X to represent the number of units to be sold. And then from the sales revenue, we subtracted the variable cost. And to get the total variable cost, we also took the variable cost per unit and multiplied it times the number of units sold. Then the next thing, price minus variable cost yields contribution margin, and the next thing we did on our income statement was to subtract out the total fixed costs. And that difference, price times number of units sold minus variable cost times number of units sold minus total fixed cost, that is supposed to yield the profit. Now, break-even point is the volume, the number of units sold, which yields zero profit, neither a profit nor a loss. So let's fill in the numbers from our contribution margin income statement data and figure out just how many units this company does need to sell in order to reach break-even point, to get out of that loss situation. Now, the price again was $20 per unit times the unknown number of units, that's what we're solving for, minus the variable cost times that same unknown number of units minus their fixed cost of $500. And we set that formula up equal to a zero profit and start doing the math. Let's see, 20 minus 5, we already know that is our $15 contribution margin. That's our contribution margin per unit. Okay. So contribution margin per unit times an unknown number of units is now equal to, because we move the 500 over to the other side by adding 500 to both sides, is now equal to $500. And the next thing we need to do is we need to solve for this unknown X, and we do that by dividing both sides by 15. 15x divided by 15 is going to equal X. The 15s offset one another or wipe each other out. And on the right-hand side of the equal sign, 500 divided by 15. And then we do the math. X is equal to 500 divided by 15. That is 33.3333. Okay. Now, we cannot sell 1/3 of a unit. We can only sell whole units. So with break even, we always round up to the next whole unit. Again, we don't round down. If we rounded down, if we sold only 33, we'd have a loss. So we'd much rather sell 34 and have a small profit rather than zero. Or rather than selling 33 and having a small loss. So approximately, break-even point is approximately 34 units. Real world rarely rounds out to exactly the right number. Now, let's look at this calculation again. This is the formula approach, where we took that income statement and laid it out as a formula. But notice what this last calculation is. This one right here that yielded the break-even point. What's the numerator? Well, that 500 was our total fixed cost. And what's the denominator, the 15? The 15 was the price of 20 minus the variable cost of 5, which we said was contribution margin. So a shortcut to calculating break-even point in units, rather than doing this whole formula, is simply to take the total fixed costs and divide by the contribution margin per unit. And that will give us our break-even point in units.